part I'm most proud of isn't the fix. It's what my daughter said when I got home that night. She was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, and when I walked in she looked up and said, "Dad, you smell like a garage." And I laughed, because yeah, I always smell like a garage. That's what 8 years of running a one-man electrical shop out of a rented bay in Barrie, Ontario, gets you. Burnt wire and machine oil, and the particular kind of tired that lives in your shoulders. But what happened that week, the job that brought me into the orbit of a woman named Victoria Strand, that changed something. Not in the big dramatic way that people like to talk about. Just quietly, the way things shift when you realize you knew something you didn't know you knew. I want to tell you what happened, because I think you'll understand it. I think most of you have been in a room where someone looked right through you. And I think most of you know what it feels like, to be right when everyone's betting you're wrong. My name is Marc Thibodeau. I've been an electrician for going on 19 years. I'm 41. I have a daughter named Sadie who is 10, and she is the reason I get up at 5:30 every morning and the reason I check my bank account with one eye closed. Her mom left when Sadie was 3. That's not the story I'm telling today, but it's the backdrop. It's always the backdrop. I run a small operation, residential mostly, panel upgrades, rough-ins for renovations, the odd commercial job when I can get it. In Barrie, that means you know your clients, you know their houses, and you're competing with the big outfits from Toronto, who can undercut you on the commercial stuff because they've got 15 guys on payroll and they spread the cost around. I survive because I show up on time and I don't invent problems. That last part matters more than people think. The call came in on a Tuesday in late October. I was finishing a panel replacement out in Innisfil when my phone rang. Unknown number, area code I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Delia, and she said she was calling on behalf of Victoria Strand. I didn't know the name. She said Victoria owned a property on the escarpment, up near Collingwood, a restored heritage farmhouse that had been converted to a private estate, and they were having an electrical problem that had stumped 2 contractors already. I asked her what kind of problem. She said, "The backup generator system keeps tripping. The estate runs on a Generac whole home system tied to a transfer switch, and twice in the past 6 weeks it's failed to kick in during an outage. They've had 2 contractors look at it. Neither could find a fault." I asked who the contractors were. She named them. One of them I knew, solid outfit, been around Simcoe County for a long time, good guys. If they couldn't find it, it wasn't obvious. I said I'd come take a look. What Delia did not mention on the phone was the full scope of the property. When I turned off the county road and through the gate and drove the quarter-kilometer gravel lane to the main house, I sat in my truck for a second before getting out. The farmhouse was original post and beam, probably 1880s, but it had been expanded and restored with the kind of money that makes restoration look like it was always there. Stone exterior, timber framing visible through floor-to-ceiling windows, a triple garage off to the east side. The grounds were immaculate even in late October, the perennial beds cut back and mulched, the flagstone paths swept clean. A black Tesla SUV and a silver Range Rover were parked near the front. I got out with my bag and rang the bell. The woman who answered wasn't Delia. She was maybe 55, tailored dark jeans and a cream turtleneck, silver hair cut close. She had the posture of someone who had been watched her whole life and had decided to own it. She looked at my truck, then at me, and her expression didn't change. "Mr. Thibodeau," she said. It wasn't a question. "That's me," I said. "Victoria?" "Yes." She stepped back to let me in. "I'll show you the mechanical room." The estate ran on a Sirius system, a 22-kilowatt Generac air-cooled unit on a pad behind the house, feeding into a 200-amp automatic transfer switch, which fed the main panel. It was a clean install, professionally done, not the kind of thing that fails for obvious reasons. I crouched in the mechanical room and started working through it methodically. Transfer switched contacts, clean, controller board, no fault codes stored, generator output voltage, within spec when I ran a manual test. I checked the utility circuit. I checked the exercise log. Nothing jumped out. Victoria stood in the doorway of the mechanical room the entire time I was working. She didn't hover or ask questions every 2 minutes. She just watched. I've had clients who do that, and usually it makes me tighten up. But there was something about the way she did it that felt less like surveillance. and more like she was used to assessing people, and hadn't made up her mind about me yet. After about 40 minutes, I stood up and said, "Can I ask you something about the 2 outages?" "Do you remember what the conditions were?" she said. "First one was early September. A storm came through, took the power out around 2 in the morning. Generator didn't start. Power was out for 4 hours. The second was mid-October, same thing, overnight, storm. Generator didn't come on. Both times overnight," I said. "Yes, and when you've tested it during the day, it works fine? Every time." I went back to the transfer switch and looked at it again. Then I went outside to the generator pad and crouched down and looked at the bottom of the unit. The pad had a slight drainage slope. Fine, that's correct. But the way the unit sat, in the orientation it had been installed, the condensation weep on the base of the controller enclosure was pointing directly into a gap in the housing. It was a minor thing, a millimeter, maybe 2. But what it meant was that over time, in the right conditions, overnight, with temperature drop, with humidity, moisture was working its way into the controller board housing. Not enough to show up in a bench test during the day when the heat of the sun had dried it out. Just enough, in the cold and damp of an Ontario night, to interfere with the sensing circuit and prevent the auto-start signal from completing. I'd seen something similar once before, years ago, on a smaller unit up in Penetanguishene. Different brand, same physics. I went back inside. Victoria was still in the doorway. "I think I know what it is," I said. She looked at me. "The other 2 contractors said the same thing and then found nothing." "I understand," I said. "I could be wrong. But I want to show you something before I tell you what I think." I brought her outside to the generator pad and I showed her the gap, and I explained what I thought was happening. She crouched down herself, in those tailored jeans, on a gravel pad, in October, and looked at where I was pointing. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she stood up and said, "How much to fix it?" I said, "It's a resealing job and a repositioning of the enclosure drain. Parts are negligible. A tube of dielectric silicone and a couple of hours of my time. Maybe $200 all in." She looked at me the way people look at you when they're trying to figure out if you're underbidding to get in the door. I said, "I'm not going to find additional problems. If this is the issue, this is the fix. If it's not, I'll tell you that too, and I won't charge you for the diagnostic." She said, "The last contractor billed me $1,100 to tell me he couldn't find anything." I didn't say anything to that. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "All right, do it." I spent the next 2 hours doing the fix properly. Cleaned the housing, resealed the gap, repositioned the drain angle, reinstalled. I ran a full diagnostic cycle on the transfer switch while I was at it, just to be thorough. Before I packed up, I left her a written summary of what I'd found and what I'd done. Because I always do that. And because I've found it's the one thing that separates a tradesperson, who knows their work, from one who's guessing and hoping. She read it standing at the kitchen island. I was pulling on my jacket. "You wrote this yourself," she said. "Yes. The other contractors sent typed forms with checkboxes. I like to be specific," I said. She put the paper down and looked at me. "I'm going to test your theory. If the generator holds through the next 2 storms, I'll call you," I said. Fair enough. I drove home. Sadie was at after-school care. I picked her up, made pasta, helped her with a math worksheet, put her to bed. Normal Tuesday. Victoria called 3 weeks later. We'd had 2 significant weather events in that time. One proper November storm that knocked out power to half of Simcoe County for 6 hours, and one ice event the week after. Both times, she said, the generator had kicked in within the specified delay window and run without fault. "You were right," she said. There was a pause. "I want to pay you for the diagnostic time I didn't charge you for." I said it wasn't necessary. She said, "I want to." Another pause. "And I want to ask you something else." What she asked me was not what I was expecting. She said she owned 4 other properties. 2 in Ontario, 1 in British Columbia, 1 in Nova Scotia, and all of them had been managed by a facilities company she'd used for the past 8 years. She'd recently ended that relationship. She was looking for tradespeople she could trust for each location. She wanted to know if I had colleagues in the other provinces, people I could vouch for. I said I might know a couple of people, and I'd make some calls. She said, "I'd appreciate that. And for the Ontario properties, I'd like to have you on retainer, if you're open to that. Quarterly walkthroughs, priority response for anything electrical. I'll pay a flat monthly fee." I drove home that afternoon and sat in my truck in the driveway for a while before going inside. Not because I was overwhelmed, just because I wanted to hold the moment before it became ordinary. Sadie met me at the door. "Dad," she said. "You're late." "5 minutes," I said. "I made tea," she said. "She's 10. She makes tea now. I don't know when that started." I sat down at the kitchen table and she put a mug in front of me and sat across from me and asked me about my day. Not the way kids do when they're performing, actually asked, and waited for the answer. I told her I'd had a good week, that I'd found something 2 other people had missed, that sometimes the work you've been doing quietly for years turns out to be exactly what's needed. She thought about that for a second and then she said, "Like how I'm the only one in my class who knows all the provinces and territories in order." I said yes, exactly like that. She nodded like that settled something important. Then she asked if we could have grilled cheese for dinner and I said yes to that too. I want to talk about Victoria for a second, because I think the easy version of this story would be to make her the villain, the wealthy woman who looks through the working man. And look, she did look through me at first. I'd be lying if I said the way she watched me in that mechanical room didn't have an edge to it, like I was on a kind of probation I hadn't applied for. But here's what I also noticed. She crouched down on a gravel pad in October in good clothes to look at what I was pointing at. She didn't call someone to come look for her. She looked herself. That told me something. And the more I thought about it, the more I understood that a woman who has enough money to have 4 properties across the country, who had been burned by contractors enough times to become that watchful, she'd earned that caution the hard way. Same as I'd earned my confidence the hard way. We were both just doing the math we'd been taught by experience. The contractor who charged her $1,100 to find nothing. I don't know for certain what happened there. Maybe they were unlucky. Maybe they were rushing. Maybe they'd learned to get paid for the visit regardless of the outcome, because that's how you stay solvent when clients waste your time. I understand all of that. I've been in that position. But there's a version of this trade where you get paid for being present, and a version where you get paid for knowing what you're looking for. The second version is slower to build. It requires years of quiet work that nobody sees. I've been building the second version since I was 22 years old, and a journeyman electrician named Ron Boasalale told me, "The diagnostic is the job. The fix is just the proof." I've carried that with me for 19 years. There's a detail I haven't mentioned yet, and I'm going to mention it because it's the part that got me, if I'm being honest. The part that made the whole thing feel like more than a business transaction. About a month into the retainer arrangement, Victoria called me about a minor issue at the Collingwood property. A couple of outlets in the east wing that had gone dead. Standard stuff. I drove up, found a trip breaker that had failed to reset visibly, sorted it in 20 minutes. She invited me in for coffee afterward. Her kitchen was the kind of kitchen that makes you want to cook things you don't know how to make. We sat at the island and she asked about my work, and somewhere in the conversation she asked about my family. I told her about Sadie. She listened the way people listen when they're actually listening, not waiting for their turn to talk. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "She sounds like someone who is going to be all right." I said I thought so too. She said, "I have a daughter. She's 27. She's in Montreal." A pause. "We don't talk as much as I'd like." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. She picked up her coffee cup. "I built the business when she was young. I was good at the work and I got better, and the company grew and I was gone a lot." She looked out the window at the property. "She has everything she needs. I made sure of that. But she needed me there and I wasn't always there, and that's the accounting that doesn't balance out." She said it the way people say things they've said before, to themselves, in the dark. Like a number they keep adding up and keep getting the same answer. I said, "She might surprise you." Victoria looked at me. "You think so?" "Sadie surprises me every week," I said. "Last week she told me she wants to be a geologist because rocks are quietly important. I don't know where she got that, but she's not wrong." Victoria was quiet for a second, and then she laughed. "Not the polished kind. The real kind. The kind that comes out before you can shape it." "Quietly important," she said. "That's exactly right." I drove home that afternoon with the heater running and the highway mostly empty, the November fields flat and pale on either side, And I thought about what it costs to build something, and what it costs to be present for something, and how those two things don't always point in the same direction. I thought about Sadie's tea, and her provinces, and territories, and her theory about rocks. I thought, I got lucky in the direction I pointed. It's been 6 months now. The generator hasn't failed once. Victoria's properties are in good shape. The retainer is steady, which means I can replace the aging van and not panic about it. It means Sadie's school ski trip is paid for, small things. But small things are what actual life is made of. I didn't win a bet. I didn't get a Lamborghini. What I got was a client who trusts me because I did the quiet work for long enough that I knew what to look for when it mattered. And I got a coffee conversation with a woman who has more money than I will ever see, and who is still, underneath all of it, adding up the same kind of numbers the rest of us are. Last week, Sadie asked me if I was happy. I was making lunches, and I stopped and thought about it for a second, because she's the kind of kid who deserves a real answer. I said, "Yeah, I think I am." She said, "Good," and went back to her book. That's the whole story. That's what the fix bought us.